Hey, this is Tim Derling. Thanks for tuning in for another episode of Tim's Vinyl Confessions. This is a special episode. I've been planning this one for a long time. When this originally goes to air, it will be 2 days after the 25th anniversary of the death of Freddie Mercury. It's hard to believe that November 24th, 1991, quarter of a century ago. And it's hard for me to believe that I would have been in grade 12 at that time, so I remember seeing it on the news. Also, unfortunately, it tends to get overshadowed, but that was also the day that Eric Carr from Kiss died. But 25 years later, and believe me, when I get out of bed in the morning, I can tell it's been 25 years later, but I thought I should do something in honor of that milestone of Freddie's passing. And no disrespect to Eric Carr, I've done a lot of Kiss episodes. It's just that Freddie was such a global phenomenon worldwide. Plus, this is a subject that I haven't pursued with Queen. I've done a lot of Queen TVC episodes, but I've never done a Queen cassette episode. Now, I'll try to keep this as short as I can, but anybody that watches the show knows that's just about impossible for me. A lot of collecting Queen has to do with pre or post 1991, if you're in North America, if you're talking about North American releases, because from the first Queen album in 1973 until 1982, in Canada, in the US, in Japan, Australia, I believe, Germany, Queen were on Elektra records. In the rest of the world, they were on EMI records. And that's the way it was until 1983, when they weren't on Elektra records anymore, and in the entire world, they were on EMI records. And that meant in North America and a few other territories, they were on Capital EMI related, basically the same company, different branches of the same company. But as anyone who knows anything about Queen and the history of Queen knows, that from the mid-'80s onward, really until Freddie passed away, Queen were sort of a non-issue in North America. They released albums there, but they didn't tour, and their popularity had taken a big dip. And there's lots of speculation on why that is. I'm not going to get into that right here, but what it means is that their original releases tended to become a bit scarce, especially cassettes for whatever reason. And in 1991, Queen signed a new deal with a company called Hollywood Records, which were actually owned by Disney. And Hollywood Records not only released the new Queen album at the time, which was Innuendo, they also reissued the entire Queen catalog, which is a fantastic thing because it made it available, made it readily available once again. And it was a very smart move on their part. It made it available because certainly when an artist dies, it's undeniable their popularity, there's a resurgence in their popularity. It's kind of a sick truth. I don't know why it is. It's the whole don't know what you got till it's gone thing. But when Freddie died, there was renewed interest in Queen. But the big thing was the inclusion of Bohemian Rhapsody in Wayne's World. And as someone who got into Queen just around that time, if it hadn't been for the Hollywood reissues, it would have been really tough to find the Queen albums. But eventually, it gets to a point where the Hollywood versions are all that you would see. So I was kind of determined to curate, if you like, a cassette collection where there's no Hollywood records mentioned whatsoever. So that's no disrespect to the Hollywood records. It's just that I wanted to find original versions of as many of the Queen cassettes as I could. Plus, I love doing cassettes, so this gave me a chance to do this. So I know there are some cassette fans out there. Todd's VHS for Life. I hope you like this one. And everybody that grew up buying the cassettes. These are some very rare ones that I've been able to get. This is my Queen cassette collection on Tim's Vinyl Confessions. Of course, starting at the beginning with the first Queen album, 1973. This is a UK version on it's on EMI, but it's also on a division called Fame. And I don't know about you, but I find it hard to say the word fame without saying fame. But I'll apologize for that. Songs on this are out of order, slightly out of order. Now I don't know what issue this is. I don't think it's an original one. I'll show you what this cassette looks like. Unusual for one that has a hole this size. It's soft plastic. That's kind of unique. And all of these UK EMI cassettes say, see inlay card for details. They all say that consistently. There's not a lot inside the said inlay card. just a little tiny bit of credits with the song titles and who wrote the songs. So that's the first Queen album. Next up is the second Queen album, Queen 2. This is another Fame cassette, UK version on EMI. And happy to see, I believe the song titles are in order on this one. This one might be a fairly new issue. If this is, I can't see this being from 74 because it's in exceptionally good shape. It's another C inlay card for details. You get used to me saying that because that's what the these cassettes all have on them. Yeah, really good printing. This is in good shape. This must be a later issue, but without a year of reissue on it, it's kind of hard to tell. Next up is the first Canadian cassette. And this is not a reissue, I don't imagine. It's a sheer heart attack. This is a Canadian Elektra version, and yeah, this one's been around for a little while. It's got a sticker on it too from We Music of Canada. Basically, it's repeating everything that's written here, but for some reason it's on here too. And you'll see a few cassettes like this too with a sticker on it as opposed to the song titles and everything just printed on. Interesting that in the cassettes they kind of use 8-track terminology instead of side 1 and 2. At this point it's program 1 and 2. Next up is the first Queen album that I got and heard all the way through, and is still one of my favorites to this day, A Night at the Opera. And what I'm holding here is a US copy, first US version of the Queen cassette we're going to see on Elektra Records. This is a very, very old cassette. Dare I say, it's actually dirty. I don't mean content-wise. I mean it's old and it's got dirt on it. That's what I'm saying. This is what the cassette looks like. This would be one of those ones that I'd be afraid to pop in for fear that it just wouldn't play. Although the writing's in good shape, so it obviously was kept somewhere. It was in very good shape. I can't say the same for the J card. Just to feel this has a really dirty kind of feel to it. I don't know how else to describe it, but and on the inside, just a little bit more credits, no pictures or anything. This looks like it's gotten wet and dried out again. It's in probably better shape than it should be, so it's kind of well preserved. Next up, Canadian issue of A Day at the Races. Now, growing up in the late 70s, early 80s, seeing cassettes of any kind in any genre, this font here brings back a lot of memories because a lot of companies use this font on their cassettes, not just WEA. But there you go, it's got the song titles there. That's what it looks like on the side. And also that on the back. You don't see many Queen cassettes like this. You also don't see many that have paper stickers on them, like this one has. It's got a paper sticker. It's not just printed on the cassette itself. Next one is another one of my favorite Queen albums, News of the World. Again, it looks old, but it's not something I remember seeing back in the day. That same typewritten font on there. I have no way of knowing if this is an original issue or not. I tend to think it might be. And again, we've got another sticker on it as opposed to being printed on the cassette itself. Slightly different look for Jazz. This again is a Canadian issue of Jazz. Different type of writing on it. Might be a little bit newer, maybe early 80s, although I'm just not sure. I don't know how you'd know for sure. If anybody can tell me, please do. And another thing that's the same one here is, again, it's got a sticker on it now with a little bit of bubbling going on here. Not unlike what would happen with the 8 tracks. But all the writing is visible. So, thing about cassettes is that double albums they'd have to be really, really long to be double cassettes. Most of the time you could still fit the contents of 2 records on one cassette, and that's the case with this Live Killers. Although with a longer cassette running time, the more chance you'll have the tape stretching. A lot of song titles written here. This is obviously a Canadian version of Live Killers. which looks like on the side and on the back. And this time we do have it printed on there, so it's not a sticker on this one. Another American version of an album to look at, the biggest Queen album, single Queen album. It's not a greatest hits. This is the Game from 1980. Some customization going on the side there. This is a US copy on Elektra Records. It's hard to see that printing there, but it is a US issue. There's nothing inside the J card whatsoever. This is what the cassette itself looks like. One that you don't see much at all, and it's kind of a classic, the sort of WEA Canada cassette I'm used to seeing, is the Flash Gordon soundtrack. Note, it's listed as if the artist is Flash Gordon, but then it says original soundtrack music by Queen. And they do the same thing on the side here, which is kind of neat. Now, of course, there's a lot of different pieces of music on here, so writing's very, very small. Well, this is getting more in line to the cassettes that I would have started buying, although they didn't look like this. Usually when I bought them, they were black tapes. Yeah, a lot of titles on there, but not a lot of music. A lot of incidental stuff. Hollywood Records, one of the things that happened when they reissued the Queen catalog in '91, the whole greatest hits saga gets really, really confusing because they didn't issue the greatest hits as it originally came out in North America. Instead, they issued something called Classic Queen, which actually had more to do with the UK Greatest Hits 2, which had just come out. So they put out Classic Queen. Later on in '92, they put out a Queen's Greatest Hits with a burgundy album cover and the Queen crest, which basically picked up the songs that weren't on Classic Queen. There was a lot of overlap going on, which made me more determined than ever to track down an original one. So this is the Canadian Elektra version of Queen's Greatest Hits. It's a very, very classic cassette. Probably one of the more common ones, even though I think it's still very, very cool to have. Definitely not something you see very often. Back cover. That's a very classic layout for a WA cassette, to have a picture of whoever it is in the middle of it. And by now, let's see if we can spot like this, the Canadian cassette tapes of the WEA in the case itself. So anything that was on Warner, Elektra, or Atlantic, or Geffen, or Island. There's always exceptions. And this is what the cassette itself looks like. It's in pretty good shape. And the last album to come out on Elektra Records for Queen was Hot Space. So this is a Canadian version from 1982. It's unique for a few reasons. There's a Warner sticker that's right on the J card itself. That's what it looks like on the side. And that's what the back looks like. You'll notice the cassette is this blue printing on it, stamped on here, which is kind of unique. It's not often in blue. But on the back, it's stamped on there a little crooked. I doubt they're all like that. Maybe this whole run of them was. I'm not sure. Next up, by this time, Queen moved to Capitol, and the first Capitol album to come out is The Works. You've seen this one on one of my road trip episodes. This is a Moncton Fine, like some of these are. This is a Canadian version of The Works. And the cassette itself looks like, I've seen a lot of cassettes that look like this on Capitol Records. I'm sure most of you have some that look like this at one time or another. And the got some credits in it for once, more credits, pictures, and lyrics for the first time. That was another good thing about the Hollywood issues. You did get all the packaging put intact if you had the cassettes. The next Capitol album to come out is Kind of Magic, 1986. This is a Canadian edition. Readily obvious when you see this. Even though the album title and the band name are customized. This is exactly what Capitol Records cassettes looked like. XDR on the side and then the serial number. And they look this way on the back as well. Don't see this one very much at all. Here's what the cassette looks like. And the insert, it's got the same picture that's inside of the record and CD. These customized graphics. That was on the gatefold of the record itself. And all the lyrics and credits. The next one is kind of cool, very cool as a matter of fact. I mentioned that Queen's popularity had dipped in North America from 85 on until their sort of resurgence began in the early 90s. But in Canada, obviously they must have sold a little bit better than by comparison that they did in the States, because in late 1986 Queen released their second live album after Live Killers called Live Magic, named after, of course, the Magic Tour. And this was an album that did not come out in the United States in late 1986. It just, Capitol did not release it. But they did release it in Canada. And this is fairly unique. It's nothing new for some Canadian acts, for instance, to have albums that only came out in Canada, even though they were on a major label. But to have an international act put out an album that came out in Canada but not in the States kind of stands out a little bit. Customized on the side there. This is very, very rare to find a Canadian version of Live Magic. Now, Hollywood eventually did release Live Magic, but it wasn't until 1996. Tape's in really good shape. And credits on the inside. If you've seen the record or the CD, no surprises there. Pictures and credits, but that's not one that's definitely not one that you see all the time. Even you know, the greatest hits and Live Magic, even if you do find Queen cassettes, you'll probably find the Hollywood records, and all the studio albums are readily available. But you won't see Live Magic. You might see a later cassette, but you won't see this as much, and certainly not the greatest hits one. The final album to come out on Capitol is The Miracle, 1989. Very typical looking Canadian version. As I'll open up this J card, I'll show you that this is when sometimes they get a little cheap with their printing, and they use sort of flimsier plastic that's closer to paper, so it tends to get some damage. And I kind of hate that. It's kind of unavoidable. It's just very, very flimsy material. So look at the eyes here, the band photo, and all the lyrics and credits to The Miracle. Now that one's not so hard to find a pre-Hollywood version on, because it was the last one to come out, and it only came out a couple of years prior to all of the Hollywood issues. So it's not such a big deal to stumble upon one of those, but still cool. CD's a little bit harder to come by, although it's not impossible as well. Late 89, some archive material was released from the BBC. It's Queen at the Beeb, a very British way of shortening the BBC. And this came out on Band of Joy Records, as did the CD, which was a little bit hard to find for me. This has 8 songs on it, 7 of which are from the first Queen album, and 1, Ogre Battle, is from the second. This J card kind of ends a little prematurely here, as you can see. Not a very low frills looking cassette here. Hollywood Records eventually did release Queen live at the BBC in 1995. Same material, did have a different cover. This is definitely an original. And a little write-up about the recording of the song, so you can see how thin this part is, or how narrow it is. So now we're getting to the phase where in North America they signed to Hollywood Records. So I got UK versions of the next few, and there aren't many more. Innuendo is the last album that was released while Freddie Mercury was alive, came out in early '91. This is an EMI version. Specifically, it's Parlophone, which is a division of EMI. I believe it was also the Beatles UK label, their division of EMI. And just like the Go all the way back to that version I showed you, their first album. This is See Inlay for Details, although it's now a clear cassette. But not a lot of difference in this as there are in any of the international versions, the Hollywood versions or whatnot, because they are becoming more unified around the world. It's got all this graphics, picture of the band. And they do thank Hollywood Records because they have the same credits that are in here that are in all of their releases around the world. And again, I'm not slamming the Hollywood releases at all. Was kind of on a mission to find ones that weren't. So where Hollywood released Classic Queen, it was basically a retake of this right down to the cover artwork. This is Queen Greatest Hits 2, came out in late '91. Now Queen Greatest Hits 2 didn't come out in North America because they didn't have as many hits as they did first time around in North America. Obviously worldwide it was a different story. And this again is an EMI version. And once again, see inlay card for details. And I do like the format that they used for these. They have each song and they go into detail about them, and they either have a picture of the single cover or a still from the video or something that is related to whatever song it is that they're talking about. So in 1995 the posthumous album was released, Made in Heaven, based on tracks that they'd worked on with Freddie before he died, and this is the UK EMI Parlophone version of Made in Heaven. Now on the CD, this is sort of, this is the front cover and this is the back cover. It's nice to have it all in one place. That's what it looks like on the side. And this time around the J card takes up the entire back. See inlay card for details. So we'll open this up, and as was inside the record and the cassette, there's a picture of Freddie with each of the band members throughout the years, and all the lyrics and credits. So a band whose popularity is probably as big now as it's ever been. You just don't go too far without running into Queen music. It's pretty amazing the way that their popularity has endured over all these years. So it's fun to collect some older versions of some of their well-known albums. And cassettes are something where it just really, when I see a cassette, a version of a cassette I've never seen before, it spots it right away. I can spot it right away. Because CDs and records, you really have to look at them sometimes to know, oh, this is different. This is not a domestic version, or whatever the case may be. So I was really happy to share that Queen collection with you. Enjoy the music. This would be a good day as any to take some Queen music and crank it up. Thanks for watching this edition of Tim's Vinyl Confessions.